2015 Eagles.
That's the 2015 Eagles. Okay.
Yeah.
How'd they finish that year?
I don't even remember. Not the playoffs.
Not the playoffs. I gotcha. That is just how it goes, right? And welcome back, guys, to another week of the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings, presented by Tubbs the Club, meaning presented by Snake River Stampede Canadian Whiskey. I'm your host, Brian Marceau, joined by Patty Frakes, hanging out in Cheney. You guys can see the red, you can see the black, but you know deep down inside it's mostly blue this week. Patty, how's it going?
Yeah, it's another, the same old song and dance for Eastern, losing to a decent team by margin that makes you feel like you had a chance for most of that, or a good section of the game, and then you just knew inevitably Eastern was going to lose the game. It just sucks because they compete enough to make you believe by halftime, and then it just crushes you even more. But doing okay.
Patty is trying to tell you guys he doesn't think we're going to talk Eastern much this episode, so he had to get it in early. I'm not saying we won't talk Eastern because, hey, it's a power rankings. And full disclosure, like, hey, whenever we go on a Monday, we're going to talk a little bit more about the conference in general and like the week to come, just because, you guys know, man, like the football season just sprints on. And as big a deal as those games are on Saturdays, and just a second afterward, it feels like it was 6 months ago. But we're 75% of the way through the season for most teams. I mean, like half the Big Sky was on a bye week last week, so that kind of equals things out. There's 4 weeks of Big Sky conference play left. That's it feels like it shouldn't feel insane. This is just me being 7,000 years old, Patty. But like you were saying before we went on, like it's almost November. Like it's just wild how that sprints through. And in the spirit of that, we're going to sprint through a lot of teams that we don't have that much interest in talking about. I know this is the power rankings, but this is more of a Big Sky, Big Take style episode today. So, Patty, just to acknowledge power rankings, let's go back and forth to get through a few teams where we talk topics. You tell me you're 12.
12.
Just
Colorado.
number 12. Just tell me number 12.
Northern Colorado.
Okay, I'll give you Cal Poly 11. Now you got 10.
10. I'll go Portland State.
Portland State. I'm going to go, oh man, this is where it's tough for like 1 second. Because actually I want to talk about this team. I'm still going to go Idaho State, which might not be the right call. I mean, hey, the week that was, there were 3 Big Sky conference games, and 2 of them hold some intrigue. Montana beat Northern Colorado 24-0. We're done talking about that game. Sacramento State loses, which is to say Idaho State holds on for an overtime win 30-27. And Idaho, kind of a weird back and forth rhythm of the game. Idaho beats Eastern 38-28. The big news out of that game is Jack Lane, starting quarterback for Idaho, is back, and he was back with a bang. But I want to talk about Idaho State because they're of like the middle conference teams, or middle to bottom of the conference teams. We're just not going to spend a ton of time on them. Question I have for you, Patty, what do you make of this Idaho State team? They sit at 4-5 overall, 2-3 in conference. Their 2 conference wins are Cal Poly and then the Sacramento State game. So I guess they need to play. Idaho State needs to play the California schools almost exclusively. Idaho State, look, I'm not trying to say the game was competitive. It was. To me, this was a little bit of Sacramento State giving the game away, a couple fumbles in the end zone. And I mean, just not being able to capitalize on the huge advantage on the ground Sac State had over Idaho State. But the Bengals won. The Bengals have been competitive against some other solid teams in the conference too. I mean, look, I know they lost the game but Idaho State beats Sac State this week right off of a narrow loss at Northern Arizona. Northern Arizona has been, frisky-ish, top of the conference-ish, not going to make the playoffs, but their fans can still tell themselves they're in the playoff hunt. What do you make of the Bengals?
I don't know. They're tough to figure out. They remind me a little bit of an Eastern team of 2010s, as in there is almost no defense played there. It's the defense has just been really bad. Even when they're getting ran all over, they still are putting 5 guys in the box, like kind of just weird stuff like that. Offensively, they're frisky. They can put up points on the board. They're fine offensively, but they don't really have a consistent ground game. They're a team to me, like if they get the right matchup, they can make something really interesting. But I don't think in the grand scheme of things they're a top half Big Sky team. I do think they've benefited a little bit from the Sac State game. Like you said, Sac gave this game away in like 4 to 5 different ways, and I pit this one a little bit more on Sac State kind of shitting the bed than Idaho State going and winning it, but they did win it, right? And I think of the bottom 4 teams, they're the most interesting, and probably, I think them and Portland State are kind of on the same wavelength for me, where it's like they get the right matchup, they can beat someone that they shouldn't, but also I wouldn't pick them to beat anyone above them in the power rankings probably.
Yeah, I think what you just referenced with Portland State is right. Whereas if Portland State and Idaho State had the same schedule, Portland State notoriously has had a rough schedule this year. We're done talking top 5 Portland State now. They're 1-6. Their one win over Idaho State. It was a tight win over Idaho State. I think that's the right description. Now, Idaho State, how many points a game you think they're scoring in conference? Because I know they're understood as an offensive team, but the Big Sky stats page is probably still loading for you. And if you don't run shows, the Big Sky, though the conference does a lot of great stuff, its website sucks and takes 6 months to load. So, Patty, in Big Sky play, what's Idaho State scoring? This team that everyone thinks is an offensive team. How many points a game is scoring?
I'm assuming it's right. I think 29 points, something like that.
Yeah, 30.4. You're pretty much there. Yeah. Good for number 7 in the league. Number 9 defense. So, I'm not trying to just box score watch, but if your thought was, yeah, Idaho State can score, probably not as well as they'd like to because they're not top half of the conference, but
they're just not efficient.
Yeah, I think that my biggest takeaway is they are a tough out. I don't think they're a team that you can, if you're not Montana State, I don't think they're a team you can just kind of glance over in the schedule the way you had the last handful of years. I think they're a different kind than the other bottom of the conference. And if we're talking all our sub NAU teams, I'm far higher about Idaho State than I am about anyone, below that. They're different than Cal Poly, different than UNC. I think them is different than PSU in spite of them talent-wise pretty much being right in line with PSU. And honestly, if I'm comparing being a Bengal fan right now to a Sac State fan, I'm probably higher as a Bengal fan just because at least the trajectory is moving upward. Yeah. Whereas hey, for Weber, Sac State, it's moving down. So we're done talking about lower teams in the conference. I want to talk to you. I want to hit a few things now, mostly with the upper teams. So the next group, we don't have to parse this, and I don't think it's really worth parsing that much for Sac State, Weber, NAU, whatever order you have those 3. It's some version of those 3. My question for you, Patty, if those 3 teams, Sac State, NAU, and Weber, are all implicated here, does the Big Sky get a 5th playoff team in this year?
I don't think so, unless NAU was to win out, which probably isn't super likely. I think the Big Sky is a 4-team league this year, and it could be even less if a team they're set up pretty good to get 4 teams in. We'll see. Montana has 2 more tough games on the schedule, but also they only have kind of a layup game this week. And so it's looking pretty likely that it's just going to be a 4-team league.
And you're saying you don't, and just to hit the standings for a second, the top four of the conference is pretty damn obvious. Of Montana State at number one, they're 8-0 on the season, 4-0 in Big Sky play. The next three, there's toss up depending on what you value and what you pay attention to of Davis, Montana, and Idaho. Those are the four playoff teams you're talking about. NAU sitting at 4-4 on the season with the Lincoln win. 2-2 in conference. Weber State sitting at 2-2 in conference, 3-5. Sac State's out of the playoffs. I'm not talking them. You are saying NAU is probably not making the playoffs. Their final four games are winnable. Weber State, Cal Poly, Northern Colorado, Eastern. Of those four, because I'm going to take your word for it, that now because the Lincoln win, they do need some help. But assuming that NAU wins out, that would put them in Big Sky play at six. That would put them at 6-2 in Big Sky play. That's a pretty tough resume to completely ignore for playoff purposes. If NAU doesn't win out of those four, which team trips them up out of Weber, Cal Poly, Northern Colorado, and Eastern?
I think it's either Weber or Eastern. I would be more inclined to think it's Eastern just because, like, let's just say the way that last year went when NAU beat Eastern on the red did not sit very well with the players. And so I think they might be a little extra motivated also because that could be a goodbye party for a certain head coach potentially. But the Weber,
pause real quick, just so listeners who heard that are not like cryptically wondering, like, hey, what's Patty mean? Aaron Best is in a contract year,
right? And he's 2-6 after 3 sub 5-1 seasons,
going to be 2-7 after Montana State.
Yes, so I think Eastern might have a little chip on their shoulder for that game, even though it is in Flagstaff. And I mean, Weber could be kind of an interesting matchup.
Because Weber can beat anyone and lose to anyone.
Right. And those two teams have like uniquely played very kind of close game. Like the all-time series since I believe they're both founding members of the Big Sky. They're like right at 500 with each other. And like I talked with Colby about this from Weber State Weekly. Like it's kind of a rivalry game a little bit. And it's not one that anyone like recognizes as a rivalry, but like for whatever reason, those two schools hate each other and they play each other really close all the time. So it's probably one of those two games. I would
pick. You got to pick one.
Yeah, they're both in Flagstaff, correct? I think they're both in Flagstaff.
Let this crack research team open this up. Yeah, they are both in Flagstaff.
Right.
So for Lumberjacks credit, they get the road games you'd want if you need to win out of Cal Poly and NAU, and they get the home games you'd want of Weber and Eastern. So with that in mind, again, you are picking which of these teams is going to stop NAU from winning out and making the playoffs in head coach Brian Wright's first season. Is it Eastern? Is it Weber?
I'll lean Eastern. I think Eastern just has a little bit more behind them right now. I think Weber has probably more pieces, but I don't know. I have a feeling that Eastern, that's a game that they win.
This is certainly not Eastern's year, but in different ways, it has certainly not been Weber's year, which we talked about that last time you and me were here. Weber State is 12 points away from being an Idaho / UC Davis kind of season. So that team is very close, but that's the razor's edge of being in one of the better conferences in the FCS is you can't just be kind of together. You have to actually you have to win some tough games, kind of like we'll talk about Idaho Eastern because that was a tough game. So hey, before we hit our next topic, Snake River Stampede Canadian whiskey. There's two different Snake River options for you to get. There's the entry level Stampede. There's the small batch 1915. Both those whiskeys, fantastic choices. They're both 3 grain, 80% corn, 10% rye, 10% malted barley. They both have double barrel finishes. Your Stampede is first fill bourbon, then finishes in Oloroso sherry casks. Your 1915 is first fill bourbon, then finishes in ex-Canadian rye whiskey cask. Either way, they're great buys. They're Canadian whiskeys I always have backups of in my whiskey stock. Grab yourself a Snake River today. So the next thing I want to hit on, because we're going to spend a little bit more time again talking top half of the conference. Patty, I want to lean on you here. it's a kind of a two-part Idaho question, which is going to lead into us trying to split up some teams. Because as an Eastern fan, you have seen Montana, UC Davis, and Idaho this season. And you've seen you've also seen all three of those teams generally healthy. It's like losing to Idaho this week when Idaho gets Jack Lane back. That's a different, if you're just watching this as a Big Sky fan, not a Tubbs the Club fan, there's maybe no reason for you to get this. Idaho was around a Northern Colorado, a little bit better than Northern Colorado, but that's the comparison offensively for what the Vandals had been in the Big Sky this season, is like a better version of Northern Colorado. Hey, Patty, our number 12 team in Big Sky play, Northern Colorado, how many points a game are they scoring in conference?
It probably went down after this week. Now I think about it, it'd be like
are they
12 points.
Is their number better than their power ranking?
I think it might be the same. I think they might be right at 12.
11.3.
Yeah.
Jeez. So, which isn't we're done talking UNC, which is just to say, look, Idaho is making this work with a lot of backups and having a backup. They were down to the third string quarterback. I know Wagner started as the second string. He lost that job and then got it back when Nick Joseph went out with broken collarbone. Getting Jack Lane back makes Idaho a completely different monster offensively. And so I want to lean on you for a second, Patty, because if you're a listener and you're like, hey, well, Marcel, of course you think Jack Lane's fantastic. You're a Vandal. Patty, tell me the difference you saw in Idaho offensively with Jack Lane under center.
Jack Lane makes that offense a totally different kind of flowing offense. It brings back the long sustained drives. It brings back the time of possession, and it brings back that whole middle of the field that it seems like has been totally absent with.
And it seems that way because it was absent.
Right. And, Lane just has some precision to him that I haven't seen very often from Big Sky quarterbacks. I'm an Eastern fan. I've seen some pretty damn good quarterbacks. Lane doesn't have like a cannon that wows you, but he can place the ball where he wants it pretty damn well, which makes it really tough to stop. Like this Eastern Idaho game, like Eastern weirdly actually didn't have like a horrendous defensive performance, even giving up 38 points. I thought it was actually one of their better defensive performances. And Lane just kind of willed some tough throws over the middle and made some big time plays. Like those first two touchdowns that he threw, both of those, like they're contested catches, and he just put it in the one spot that Idaho's guy could get it and the Eastern guy couldn't. I think Lane being there really elevates the ceiling and the floor for Idaho looking forward. Hey, they got a pretty, I wouldn't say a totally super soft schedule, but compared to what it has been for Idaho, like the schedule is much softer moving forward and into the playoffs, where now teams aren't going to have a ton of game film on. They'll have 3 or 4 games, but they're not going to have the same level of game film that they will for most other teams. And I think that is a major edge for Idaho moving forward over maybe some teams like, Davis has kind of been Davis has been the same team all year. Maybe, they've gotten better, but schematically they've been the exact same team all year. Idaho seems to like completely flipped that identity with Lane back at quarterback.
Oh yeah. The things I want to talk about that I did not talk about on our instant reaction episode, because if you guys want, Dallas and I talked for an hour after the Idaho Eastern game, a lot of it about Jack Lane. The two things it changes for Idaho are, one, just look, Idaho, they're a top 10 level team without being able to move the ball at all. But Idaho had essentially no margin for error. The defense had to just be fantastic. And still, you had a lot of tight games. Some that should be tight, like, hey, turns out Abilene Christian's pretty good. So, that Abilene Christian coming back early in the season, making it a game against the Vandals, that doesn't look like awful, a month afterward. But also, like, hey, Idaho if they could put points on the board, that NAU game would not have felt competitive. And honestly, I think Idaho probably beats Davis if they can put some points on the board. So that just changes things. But the big deal for the Idaho end, like you talked about, I think Vandal fans, and I'm speaking as a Vandal fan, Big Sky fans, I don't know how you guys feel about this, because everyone's kind of in their own silo for the most part. And you pay attention to other teams when your team plays them. The reputation of the coach is kind of just what persists with the team, and either you're with it or you think it's ironic, whatever. I think that Vandals who are anxious about the season are now able to say, my God, that was a coaching job to get Idaho through those 9 games at 6-3 without being able to move. Well, it was 8 games before Plain came back, but to get through those 9 games at 6-3 without being able to move the ball outside of big plays at all. To me, it completely flips the script on how to interpret what Idaho's done this year. Which weathering the storm. I mean, when we talk coaches of the year, Patty, it's hard to say anything about someone other than Brent Vegan when the team Montana State has not lost a single game. But Vegan has the case of coach of the year for, look, what else is he supposed to do? All the boxes are checked. Jason Eck now has the case of, hey, like doing the most with the least, and they're still going to finish at a strata, not at Montana State, but comparable. Suddenly, I'm like, hey, an Idaho Montana State playoff rematch. If there were a playoff rematch, I don't know how much you'd go back to that 38-7 tape to figure out what that game's going to be. Or like, hey, UC Davis as a Vandal with Jack Lane. Oh, give me UC Davis in a rematch of the playoffs. I would love to see the Aggies again. So that it just completely changes the narrative of the season to me, and the ability to handle some of the injuries Idaho's seen on the defensive side of the ball. Because I think the rough schedule is wearing on the team. I think the bye came at the right time for Idaho. And maybe uniquely, it came at the right time for Idaho compared to almost every team in the Big Sky. Because Idaho is a week later on their bye than most teams. Half the conference was on bye last week. So, okay, we got that on Idaho. Now I want to ask you, you as an Eagle have seen Montana, Davis, and Idaho with Jack Lane. I want your power ranking on teams 4, 3, and 2 in the conference. Don't worry. Don't think of this as like, hey, body of work. Think of this as like if you're a fan of someone in the playoffs, which of those teams do you most want to see? Which of those teams do you most not want any part of?
Right. I think 4 is it's Montana right now. Their defense still, they looked good against Northern Colorado, but like everyone's defense looks good.
Northern Colorado scoring 11.3 points per game, Big Sky play. You're right. Every single team against Northern Colorado looks great.
I'm hoping they make Eastern's defense look excellent in Greeley in a couple weeks. We will see how that goes. Then, deciphering between Idaho and Davis is tough because I think Davis has hits a little bit of another gear. Like they offensively have been looking much better as the season has gone on, but I think Idaho is the better team. I personally would put Idaho at 2, Davis at 3. If you're talking body of work, obviously Davis is above Idaho, but I think, like you said, if this is a rematch, I am absolutely picking Idaho, and I think it's a competitive game, but I think Idaho actually pulls away to an extent. Davis they're no doubt they're a good team. They're going to be probably a top 10 team throughout the year. But like you look at their schedule and they've got some tough damn games coming up, and they're probably going to be, I have a feeling they might be limping into the playoffs a little bit. And if you match up, Idaho and Davis in like the second round of the playoffs, I am hammering Idaho.
Yeah, and hey, to talk that schedule, you mean for Davis in 2 weeks, they have some tough games. Davis has Northern Colorado this week and then closes the season at Montana, hosting Montana State, at Sacramento State. So your official ranking, Montana 4, Davis 3, Idaho 2. Want to follow up with Davis, Idaho, one more question. What would you have to see in the next 2 weeks to flip Idaho? Well, you said you have Idaho narrowly above Davis. What would you have to see in the next 2 weeks to flip back to Davis at 2, Idaho 3?
I think
other than a Jack Lane broken collarbone again.
Right. Jeez, that would be bad. I think part of it is, does Idaho's defense continue to have some struggles? they're a bend but don't break defense. They're going to give up yards. And I actually the Vandal fans were pretty upset with their performance, against Eastern, but they only gave up They only gave up 2 offensive touchdowns, if I'm remembering right.
But sorry, before you finish that, just so I can finish the Vandal circle on that,
Right.
The reason for me that I was more disappointed offensively is that my takeaway was if Kikoa Vesperis did not get hurt, Idaho probably loses that game, even with Jack Lane.
Maybe. I don't know. As a league,
they were moving the ball pretty. I mean, look, Eastern scores 40 points a game. This is to your point, Patty. Eastern is good offensively. Ignore the record. There's a lot of teams like Idaho who would kill to be scoring the way Eastern has for the year. But still, I don't know. That's why that's what I left the game thinking was, I know Eastern can move the ball, but no pass rush whatsoever. And if their backup quarterback hadn't had to handle things, you're understanding that game different. Back to your point.
Anyway, man, I half forgot my point of it now, but anyways, I think Idaho's defense overall, people were disappointed with the output versus the Eastern team, but Eastern's a pretty good offense. They held the Eastern to just 2 touchdowns offensively, and made some big time stops down the stretch that made differences in the game. Got a key turnover later in the game. They made plays that to me show that they're not. I don't think that they have declined or anything like that. I think it was more of Eastern's pretty good, and I think the matchup was just relatively good for Eastern.
Well, I also think for Idaho again. If I'm going to be in Idaho, I don't like to use the term insider. I host a podcast,
right?
If you don't follow Idaho, there's no reason to know this. Idaho is down their top 2 cornerbacks.
Right.
Kind of big deal when you're playing a team like Eastern.
Yeah, exactly. And, for me, I think the big things that I'd have to see to flop Davis and Idaho, flop them back is I think, Idaho's offense has to regress a little bit from that Eastern performance, which they probably will playing like a Weber defense. But, they have a chance to kind of work out a few of the kinks that we did see in the Eastern game. There's a couple wide open touchdowns that Jack Lane missed just because his read was on the other side of the field, and a pick that looked kind of bad, but also the Eastern player was wrong. Jack Lane was right. If the Eastern player was doing what he was supposed to do in that scheme, it was probably a big gain. So it was one of those goofy situations. Anyways, I think you have to see some regression from the Idaho offense. You have to see them get more predictable again like they were. I just don't see that happening. And you have to see the defense continue to kind of struggle. But I think the way that things are shaping up for Idaho, they're going to just get better and better and better. As I think they're going to have a running start into the playoffs. And I think that's a massive, massive advantage for the Vandals.
Yeah, Idaho closed the season out. They're on bye this week. Then the Vandals have top 5 Portland State, Weber State at home. The Portland State's a road game. Weber State at home, then closing the season at Idaho State, which, as you referenced earlier, I don't have the Massey rankings open. I could if you guys want to hear a bunch of annoying clicks. Idaho's Massey ranking is going to be pretty damn high with strength of schedule. That's just how it's been for Idaho this season. Okay. I have some questions about you about the week we're about to see. First, Hughes River Expedition. If you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, do not look past your backyard. Venture into the largest protected wilderness in the continental U.S., located right here in the great state of Idaho. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River no return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. You can even check out special trips like the one to see the Perced meteor shower. Camp on pristine beaches, run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and take in the history along the river while you fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. Use your brand clothes, let HRE handle the rest. So grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Gem State. Call them now at 800-262-1882 or check them out at hughesriver.com. I don't mean to skip talking about Montana State, but the Bobcats are on bye. Nothing has changed. The Bobcats still have the best offense in the Big Sky, scoring just under 44 points a game. They still have the best defense in the Big Sky, giving up just under 14 points a game. What do we call a team with the best offense and the best defense in like the entire Western United States? We call them good. So, hey, there we go. You're welcome, Ron Lowney. So this week, the Big Sky slate, there's a few more games than we had in week 9, where there were three total teams playing. So week 10, the Big Sky, Patty. We have Montana at Eastern, Weber State at NAU, Northern Colorado at Davis, Montana at Cal Poly, Portland State at Sac State. Tell me what you got your eye on. It's kind of a weird slate. Like, the teams are back. There's a lot of the haves versus the have-nots, or just the middle of the conference playing the middle of the conference. So, hey, of that slate, give me Patty's game of the week.
It's kind of a snooze fest in the Big Sky this week. I'm not gonna lie. The top, like, all the playoff teams have either buys or like they're playing probably the bottom 3 or 4 teams in the conference. I mean, I think Eastern's down there right now. So it's kind of, in terms of like a national perspective and playoff picture, kind of like a boring week. I guess you could say the NAU Weber game is NAU Weber is probably the game of the week in terms of like, at least there's some sort of an interesting aspect to it. But like, if you want to watch the most fun game, it's probably going to be Portland State, Sac State.
You're saying that over Eastern Montana State, which, according to ESPN, if you want to go to that game, tickets as low as $57. So there's at least supposed to be some butts and seats and cheenies. So I'm going to overrule part of this. We're just not going to talk about Portland State. I don't care. Walk me through. We actually did this for a second, but hey, Weber NAU.
It's kind of a matchup of like NAU, kind of similar to the Sac State Idaho State matchup. Like, the trajectories of the two teams seem to be going separate directions. NAU seems to be, as a program anyways, trending up. Weber has been trending down. I think NAU fans have been happy with some of the coaching things that they've seen, happy with the growth of the program. Weber has not been so happy. This is a matchup that's interesting. I think it's kind of favorable for NAU when I look at this. I think Weber's had some trouble stopping the run this year. And, the weakness of Weber State's defense has been weird enough to say for, Weber's always had good linebackers. It's like their linebackers on defense haven't been nearly as good as they're typically used to. And I think that just pairs well with what NAU wants to do. I think NAU has a pretty good matchup in this one. And I have a hard time seeing Weber win it. But that's when Weber is dangerous, is when you think they're going to lose, they win games.
Well, Weber, technically, they're dangerous everywhere. So hey, ignore the UW loss week 1. Weber's 4 losses are by a combined 10 points. That's how close this is to a team with 1 loss, and that loss being an FBS loss. But that isn't the team we have. This Weber, it just seemed like this is not their year. In a year that it probably should have been. This is definitely a year that got away from Weber. I think it's kind of safe to call Weber, honestly, like the more talented out of those two teams, which, by the way, it's Brian Wright's first year at NAU. That's not a slight. I think your summation of where NAU fans are right now is correct. Hey, compare NAU to Idaho State last year, right? Hey, ISU has a new coach. They pick up 3 wins, and it feels like the narrative in Pocatello was that things are completely turning around, which they were. It was still 3 wins. NAU is already doing better than that. NAU the playoffs are not done for the Lumberjacks. I'm going to say I agree with you as far as relevance, because for NAU, on Tubbs the Club said 1,000 times, Idaho's in a playoff if they want to skip Thanksgiving games and host. The Vandals can't lose a game and have that happen. NAU is in a playoff too. If they're going to make the playoffs, they do not have the ability to lose. They don't have an awful schedule, but they don't have a life walkover schedule. So I think this game for sure is the game of the week as far as like actual implications that mean something for FCS football extending into December, November. But I will say, man, Montana State Eastern seems like it could be fun. Eastern's kind of a train wreck to watch in a way because they're not bad. Like, I mean, I just told you, I think if Vesperis doesn't go down, there's every chance that Idaho, even with Jack Lane, loses that game at home in front of a near sellout crowd, which is a huge deal for a school like Idaho to hold on to those games. But honestly, dude, Eastern is kind of, they're going to be 2-7. Like they'll again be like the best 2-7 team in the history of FCS football, but 2-7 is 2-7. And as the thing you talked about, Eastern, in the same way that this is not a Weber year, in a more dramatic way, this is really not Eastern's year. So maybe the Montana State actually isn't as intriguing. I guess I'd say the Montana State game, part of why you pay attention is at least Eastern has a real O-line, and curious how well Montana State's defense holds up against what will be the best offense they've seen on the season. So, okay, we got essentially your game of the week picked. How you feeling about running through Patty's picks with no notice?
Sure. I'm down. That'll work.
Okay. To hit those, give me a couple annoying clicks. Montana at Eastern.
Montana State at Eastern. I'm not feeling this one being close at all. I think the matchup is not good for Eastern, especially if Kiko Vesperis is out, which with how like it's a calf issue, and when you have calf issues, that typically means you're worried about things like Achilles, and so you're gonna play it pretty safe. So especially the guy that you have next year. So I have a feeling that Kiko Vesperis does not play in this game. Malik Dotson was still in a boot last week. Eastern's missing a lot of their weapons, so probably Jared Taylor starts the game. I've been told from people inside the program that Jared Taylor has like a better arm than he has showed, just because the coaches haven't really used it. But also we haven't seen that. I've seen flashes in practice, but like he's not going to be a good Big Sky passer, I don't think. So I don't like this matchup for Eastern. I think they're going to be one-dimensional. I think Montana State's really damn good. The one positive you have if you're Eastern is like Montana State historically has played pretty close games on the red. Like for whatever reason, they don't, 2022 Eastern was probably, I think that 2022 team was probably the worst of the last 3 years. And Eastern was a fumble away from winning that game. If they don't fumble the ball, they kneel it out and win.
Who was the Eastern quarterback that year?
Gunnar Talkington.
Okay, yeah, that was the Gunnar Talkington era for half that season, right?
Right. So Eastern got the first down. If he just slides and takes a knee, it wasn't Talkington, it was a running back. If they just slide or take a knee, they kneel the game out and win. He gets tackled, fumbles the ball. Montana State gets the ball on like the plus 25, goes and scores and wins the game. So that was like a devastating loss if you're an Eastern fan, and then the season just went downhill from there. I think Montana State wins it, and I don't think it's close.
Okay, I'm gonna run through a couple others because I just kind of dumb question occurred to me to ask you. You already said you think you're taking Weber over NAU. Well, no, I feel like you've gone back and forth because earlier you said Eastern's the team that ruins NAU's playoff hopes. So does that mean you're going with Weber?
I'm going with NAU. I'm going with NAU.
Okay.
I think the matchup is better for NAU. I think they're going to be able to move the ball a little bit. They're not a team that like wants to throw the ball a bunch, and I think that's.
And Ty Pennington is back.
Right. But I think generally they're just a better running team, and like the one weakness that they've had in the run game is like their offensive line wasn't great at getting up to the second level. I don't think that matters when Weber's linebackers have probably been some of the worst in the conference. So like I like the matchup for NAU. I think they win it at home.
Yeah, on the defensively, Weber has been, depending on what you choose to pay attention to in conference play, they're just like a middle of the pack defense. So like that, weirdly, they're kind of like the Montana narrative being kind of weird. Like Weber has been mostly more effective scoring the ball and not particularly great at stopping teams. which is it's both a flipped script, but also not when you keep in mind Mickey Mental, his background is he's an offensive coach and just, hey, this happens when really good coaches leave the Big Sky. Like some guys are irreplaceable. Jay Hill is an irreplaceable dude. Northern Colorado Davis, you get 10 seconds here.
The only thing that would make this interesting is if Davis just totally shit the bed and turned the ball over a bunch of times. Don't think it's interesting. I think Davis wins this one big. And, the one thing is like, hey, is Davis looking forward a little bit? But I think Davis wins this one big.
You have 9 seconds, Montana at Cal Poly.
What's weird is I actually think this one is slightly interesting.
Cal Poly can move the ball.
Exactly. And the Grizz have not been able to stop anyone. I think what this comes down to is like if Cal Poly can take care of the football, like I think they make it close, and I think Missoula is about ready to burn down Town Hall or something. But Montana will win the game in the end, I think. But like this is one of those one of the spots where Montana's defense has to show improvement, or else like I'm totally out on them as a playoff team. Like they're going to make the playoffs, but all of a sudden, if they can't stop Cal Poly, like I think they all of a sudden go from like a top 10 team to like, I don't know if they're going to win a game in the playoffs unless they get a Pioneer League matchup.
Were you at all surprised to see Ayat out there for Montana last week?
I was and I wasn't. Like, Ayat clearly won the job, it seemed like, in training camp, right? And,
yeah.
Fife had his like good moments, but also like I did feel like Ayat didn't get a great like opportunity. Like he got his chances, but the second he made a bad throw, he got pulled. And it was like he never got a chance to really like play through mistakes. Then Fife goes in and he gets to play probably like 2 or 3 of the worst defenses in the conference, like back to back to back. And so, a little surprised, but I don't know if Fife versus Ayat changes the results too much. I bet Fife is back this week, but we'll see.
Yeah, like I'm with you, but with the other background, like Bobby Houck famously, like there's a lot of stuff he's done historically. He's made like 4 national championship games. He just hasn't been a guy who develops quarterbacks. So if you accept who you are and that's who you are, then Logan Fife is the one you roll with. And I'm not going to push back on your comment about the defenses Logan Fife has been able to accrue his production against. However, there's some other soft defenses the Grizz faced earlier in the year, and Ayat was not exactly lighting the world on fire through the first handful of games. So I don't know. Hey, before Jack Lane came back, who I love him back for Idaho, I'd tell people like, you know what? If Jack Lane's going to be not playing, I wouldn't mind if Idaho had a Logan Fife they could trot out for competition. All right, we're done talking about that because like the takeaway is Montana should win by 1,000, and if they don't, I don't know, don't feel you are out on them as a team that's going to advance beyond like the second round of the playoffs.
Right.
All right, Portland State, Stack State. Let's pretend you are not a football junkie, Patty. What would bring you as just as a general Big Sky fan? What would make you actually sit through most of that game?
I think it's going to be another high-scoring game. Stack State has played a lot of relatively high-scoring games, and Sac State has been no stranger to crazy close games that probably shouldn't be close. Like, Sac State has given away games late and then won those games anyways when they play Weber, or lost those games. Like, Sac State fumbled that game against Idaho State away like 4 separate times. They lost the game to Eastern, who is probably I think Sac State's probably the better roster than Eastern right now, and they lost that game. Sac State has a higher ceiling than what they are, but they've played freaking heartbreaking games and crazy overtime games. They've played in overtime like 2 or 3 times this year, it seems like. So they always are fun. Portland State is going to put up points, and they haven't been able to stop anyone. I think it'll be like a fun, high-scoring game that, it could go either way.
It's back-to-back OT games for Sac State.
Right.
Okay. Oh, hey, I want your take here. Sacramento State sits at 3-5 on the season right now. One Big Sky win on the year. The Hornets close with Portland State, Montana State, Cal Poly, and Davis. Does Sac State have 2 wins left on the season?
I think they do. They should.
They have 3.
I think they should, but will they? I don't know. I think they're a team that likes to give games away, and I don't know. Sac State makes me mad because I thought they weren't going to be very good at the start of the year, and then the first 4 or 5 games of the year, I was like, geez, dude, I was wrong. Sac State figured some things out, and now they're back to where I thought they were going to be at the start of the year. And I don't even feel smart for how I felt about them before the year because of how it's gone. But anyways, I think they have 2 wins left on the schedule. I think they win this game against Portland State, but I think it's really close. And man, I think Sac finally wins the close game that they've been, kind of giving away throughout the year, but we'll see.
That would give the Hornets 5 wins. Does 5 wins in 24 equal 12? As in Pac-12?
Maybe it might. Honestly,
Okay.
I don't think the wins matter.
It doesn't. It's just that whole story is hysterical. That's it. The
right.
Sac State, who used to play in front of their men's basketball team, played in a gym smaller than both the high schools that I went to.
They still do.
Well, they have a new place coming up. Well, I mean, they're
right.
playing. It's being built. They're going to play. It's going to be awful this year for Sac State men's basketball when they play wherever they're supposed to play, wherever the Kings play this year, which is going to be an absolute nightmare. Or rephrase it, it's not going to be a nightmare. It's going to be the best study environment in Northern California if you're okay to play the admission to get in there. Right. Got to hit the comment section for 1 second. Crewhead76 talking about our Montana talk. He said, I'd start 5. I'm with you. He also says top 5, meaning Portland State gets the W, and nutsack to the Pac 7. I prefer to just type out SAC and then K in parentheses. The K is silent. The question is the K silent or invisible? That's kind of a choose your own adventure call there. James Jacobs, NAU has something to play for in their home. Talking about NAU Weber State earlier. Crewhead 76 saying NoCo pulls the upset. Dane Moon, another one of our Montana State dudes, saying F the Grizz, which I don't think that means he's picking Cal Poly, but I think I do know what that means. Otherwise, Crewhead 76, if Kikoa is out, it's going to get ugly, talking about Eastern and Montana State. Last question for you, Patty, mostly because I wanted to talk about myself too. If we're 3/4 of the way through the season, now neither of us get to just focus on our teams here. What's your impression of the Big Sky? Through 3/4 of the season, half of Big Sky play is done for most teams, or a little bit more for some others. We have 4 weeks of play left. That's officially 4 Big Sky Conference and weeks left. What's your impression of the Big Sky Conference a little bit halfway through conference play?
So are we talking national perspective on this, or just general?
I don't care. Your call. Take it where you want to, man.
National perspective, I think this is the worst version of the Big Sky Conference we've had in years. Just looking at how things have rolled out. Does that mean the conference is by any means worse than the second in the nation? No. But it's been a fun year. I feel like this year there's been a lot of parity, a lot more parity than we are used to, at least the last couple of years, where typically you have 1 or 2 really good teams at the top that you can bet pretty safely that they're going to win their way through the conference. And that hasn't necessarily been true other than Montana State, but from UC Davis down to I'd say Eastern, maybe, I guess Portland State, because they took Davis to the brink, right? I think any of those teams in that range can beat each other given how the matchup swings and stuff. And it's been a fun year to watch and pay attention, but also a really not fun year to pick games and try to predict games correctly. Because I think all of us that picked the Big Sky have had our worst year in 3 or 4 years.
For me, this is easily my worst. I picked the conference better than 90% for the last 3 years. Let's just say I'm not at 90% this year.
Yeah.
So, This is a different way of saying that. Um, I think we have a handful of teams, and hey, this is just like the era we're at in college football. Like conference stuff is all over the place. Being an FCS coach is, to me, it's increasingly no longer thought of as a bridge to being an FBS head coach. It's a bridge to being a coordinator. But if you're not Troy Taylor out of Sac State going to Stanford, we actually haven't had a ton of Big Sky coaches who jump up to be head coaches right away. But which is all just to say, I feel like the footing of the Big Sky itself has felt uneasy for longtime fans. Just in terms of like saying, I know exactly what this conference is. You see that with coaching, and we've seen some of what you're talking about parity wise. I think you can point directly to just the transition of coaches.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about Weber State for a second and Sacramento State in the same breath. They both feel like they're the exact same team, and they're both teams that had to say goodbye to like best coaches in program history. And it's hard to stick that landing. Then you look at Idaho, who did stick the landing in, picking their new coach 3 seasons ago. Then you look at NAU, who's been, disappointing-ish for 3 or 4 years. Then they look like they look like they may have, if you don't call it a home run, you call it at least a double in picking Brian Wright. I think you can kind of track coach transition, and that can mostly tell you how things are going in the conference. I think you're right that, look, this is Montana State's conference this season. That I think that jury's in. And I don't know, like I wouldn't be shocked to see 3 teams make the playoffs in the Big Sky, but one of the bottom, 4 teams make playoffs. One of those bottom 3 teams loses their first game. I would in no way be shocked to see that. But I will say it does make the conference fun to have, in the same way where you're saying there's no, minus Montana State, there isn't that much gap between some of the teams. Like, Idaho is a top 10 team who just had a tough, like a nail biter in some ways, against a team with 2 wins. It's also kind of fun when there aren't really the garbage teams. Like you do have your Northern Colorado and your Cal Poly, who are in different versions of transitions too. And I just think those programs there's some structural stuff that explains why those 2 schools are struggling, not to be flippant towards them. But other than that, you have had some programs that are moving in the right direction. Idaho State looking like a tough out that's not nothing. And also hey, Cal Poly, they've had some coaching transition. You can see how that could be a 500 team, right? You got to squint a little bit, but hey, Paul Wolf did pretty well at Eastern. You might say hey, he wasn't your best, but who cares? At Cal Poly, he doesn't have to be your best. He may be the best at Cal Poly, ex-Eastern coach to coach at Cal Poly. You could put you can hang your mantle on something there. But the long and short of it is, I think it's been a fun year. Even if it hasn't been like that, like you said, top of the mountain, we have these 3 or 4 teams we think are going to just beat everyone's ass in the playoffs. But if we're people who pay attention to the conference are sitting here saying man, we're like halfway through and I'm struggling to pick, that usually isn't indicative of a shitty season.
Right. Yeah. It's been fun. And it's weirdly this feels like to me, I feel like the Big Skies, at least since I've paid attention to it, always had some of the best, the highest tier coaching. I don't know if it has this year, and it's been kind of interesting to see the most talented team doesn't always win. And that's been a very true theme this year, I think. You have teams like Weber, Sac, and Eastern that look like they have talent. Even Montana in some stretches that look like they have talent to be top, 4 teams in the conference, and just hasn't materialized, right? It's been an interesting year for that.
Well, hey, to be fair though, at the same in 2022, talking about that season real quick, just as a reference point. Yes, that was 2 football seasons ago. How many Big Sky teams had their best coach in program history at the same time?
Right. That's true.
You had Montana, best coach in program history. You can talk championships, whatever. Houck's a pretty damn good coach. Right. You got Montana with the best coach program history. You had Idaho that year with, to me, the best, at least recent coach in program history. Sac State and Weber, best coaches in program history. kind of, and hey, Davis had Dan Hawkins too. So
Yep.
that's a lot of really sound coaching minds. And we haven't even talked about, okay, I know Aaron Best is likely on his way out, but like, there's some Big Sky schools who would love to have Aaron Best as their head coach. Like Aaron Best, his resume is not terrible. He's made a national championship game. How
Right.
Jason Eck hasn't made a championship game yet, so like that can't mean nothing that Aaron Best was there. And for Cal Poly, I know they're kind of riding that turnaround, but like, hey, Cal Poly landing Bill Baldwin and Paul Wolf, that's not a bad time to be in the conference, dude.
Right.
So anyway, we're gonna call it a night. I don't know if usually we kind of kill this the last week of the season. We'll see. But I like doing the power rankings episode. Like it's even though we don't even talk power rankings anymore. I'd like the nominal title, but support the show. Tubbs the Club, patreon.com /Tubbs the Club. Join the hashtag Elite Tubbs Discord. Give me a few bucks for whiskey if you want it. I mean, to keep the lights on. That's what we use that money for. And honestly, our Discord is to me like the best online chat for Big Skies. Even though it's Idaho centric, I think it's like one of the best chats for Big Sky football overall. In addition to that, pay attention to the Tub Stack, aka tubstheclub.substack.com. Patty's right in there. Jeff Liedecker's right in there. It's some extra stuff we put out to cover the Big Sky Conference as a whole. Patty, I'm not going to hit that video this time, but you have any parting words before we call it a night?
Yeah, no. Everyone wish me luck this weekend as I watch Montana State most likely rush for 400 yards on my football team. So thanks everyone for listening. Go Eagles.
Hell yeah. Go Vandals.
Go Vandals. Go Vandals. Go Vandals.